the veto of Senate Bill 3 by Governor Abbott, a bill that bans THC, a bill that you wrote and passed. So, what was your initial reaction, and had you had any conversations with the governor about this before?
Well, it's the governor's prerogative to veto bills, and you never know which ones are going to draw a veto until it happens. There's very little communication in the past with veto bills, and it's the governor's prerogative to do that. He raised some legitimate concerns in his proclamation as to why he got to where he did. And I have all the confidence in the world that we will alleviate and address those concerns in special session fairly short order. Today and this week, in fact, has only reaffirmed the state's ability and right to regulate hemp, aka THC products. So we're in a good position. SB3 is on solid ground going forward. We will have a fairly my prediction would be is we will have something fairly close to what SB3 did, subject to the rulings in the Eighth Circuit today, as well as federal action is trying to go to where we have gotten. So as far as the governor goes, I don't fault him for his logic, and I don't fault him for being able to do it. I think that there's a lot of misinformation that surrounds this industry in general. Most of it self-created, and most of it factually not accurate. So, and what I've found in this area, and I've been in this area since 2019. I wrote the original farm bill that actually legalized the hemp product for agricultural at the state level in 2019. And you can go back to archives of hearings and testimony. And we even when I laid it out on the Senate floor that at the time consumables were kind of bubbling up around the country, and they were a part of the conversation. And I warned very clearly and very succinctly that if you go down the road of legalizing or actually perpetuating the myth that it's legal but developing a recreational pot use, we would remove the hemp products from Texas. And that's where we find ourselves today. So I'm not surprised we got here. Industry shown the inability to not chase the dollars. It's a very lucrative profession, and they have put profits over people for the better part of 6 years now. We tried to fix this in 21, 23 with several different versions of bills that didn't get out of committees. But we're here now and we're going to address it.
And I wanted to ask you because, as you mentioned, the governor had his legal reasons. He really based his veto on legal reasons. He said that he believed that the Arkansas law, which was the only other state to ban THC, was held up in the courts. And he worried that Texas, this law would be held up in the courts. But as you mentioned before, today, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals reversed that bill being blocked by a lower court. Does that clear the way for the Arkansas ban on THC
Yeah,
product?
it
And
absolutely does.
and so I'm wondering that combined with the fact that a congressional committee, the House Appropriations Committee today passed a ban on THC products like Texas did, if I'm not mistaken. So, given those two things, what impact does that have on the governor's veto and this special session that's going to start July 21st?
It's factually accurate to say several states have actually banned THC consumable hemp products, specifically the synthetic brand. The distinction is Texas went for a 0% THC versus the federal 0.3 hemp that was related to the actual plant itself. I think Virginia was the one case that was modeled a lot across the country with different variations of at what level would they ban and how would they go about that. So Arkansas's case today, the main thing to take away, and has been consistent with FDA law, the Federal Drug Administration and Cosmetic Acts, when the Farm Bill was implemented, they gave the rights to the state to regulate or choose to legislate, however they choose to, on consumables. And so that's been the law of the land federally. Mixed
And
up, and go ahead,
go
mixed
ahead.
up in that conversation is I've struggled to understand why the industry and the messaging that they've been successful in deploying has ignored the fact that even under the federal law, zero point 0.3 or above THC content, it is a control one and it is illegal. It becomes pot, it becomes marijuana at that point. And so, regardless of the origin, whether it's Delta 9 converted to a Delta 8, to a Delta 10, to a whole flower, regardless of its origin coming from hemp or coming straight out from the cannabis plant, if it's above zero point 0.3, it is illegal federally, and pot is illegal federally, and statewide it would be illegal, and it's illegal even prior to the Hemp Act. So this misnomer that these products that sit on the shelf today that are absolutely hotter than the human body should be able to take at a regular basis, and it creates cannabis use disorders and all of those factors that go into these conversations. It is illegal, and the fact that the industry has been able to perpetuate that lie. So that's why the federal government chose to give the regulations to the state when it comes to products or consumables. The Federal Farm Act set the legislation in place for the plant to be 0.9 less, Delta 9 to be 0.3 or less to maintain legal, because it was non-psychotropic at that. So all the Arkansas ruling does today is only reaffirm what has been federal law under FTA regulations and many opinions to the side that Texas and all the states combined and states that have already banned it have the legal right to do it. And that's where we're at. And it only puts SB3 more and more on solid ground that we already assumed was going to go our way. That Circuit 8 court was not a surprise to those that were paying attention to the court. And so we feel like Senate Bill 3 that bans is on good solid ground. And to be clear, when you hear this industry talk about regulations, they're only interested in regulations that allows them to do what they're doing today, and that's to perpetuate a recreational marijuana market. And Texas isn't going to go there. So when they say we're good with regulations, they're only good if they're their regulations. So even if the legislature choose to, quote, regulate it, I am certain, based on the governor's proclamation, that we will still ban, and he followed up with a statement after his proclamation, we will still ban synthetic. And if you ban synthetic THC in this marketplace, these business models do not survive.
And I was just wondering, so are you saying that, because the governor, obviously, as we've been talking about, has called for very strong regulations on THC products. Are you saying that you believe that those regulations that he's called for will be enough? Or would you still prefer SB3 to go into effect? Do you think the governor would change his mind now, given what we've seen in the Eighth Circuit?
I can't speak for the governor specifically on what will or what not change in his perspective. I can tell you he followed up with a statement yesterday from his governor communication staff that they are all on board of banning synthetic THC products. It is the synthetic THC products that have created this market of effectively high potency THC, unregulated as far as dosing or what's in it. And I remind people, the natural marijuana plant itself is one issue, but when you synthesize it, you add up to 500 different chemicals to change the makeup of that plant to get it to the potency that it's currently being sold. So it's not only that you're having hot THC or very potent THC, you're mixing it with 480 to 500 different chemicals to get it there. Those in themselves are unknowns and problematic for the health of human consumption. But to be clear, the governor came back out and said, I am for banning synthetic THC, which was the heart of SB3.
So you would be good with that?
Absolutely.
And let me ask you, because the lieutenant governor said at his news conference that Governor Abbott wants to legalize marijuana by regulating it. Is that something you agree with? And does vetoing the THC ban equate to legalizing marijuana?
I would say, again, I can't speak for the governor, but knowing the governor and knowing the state of Texas and knowing the constituents that we all serve, Texas has never been a very pro recreational pot market. So I do not believe that was the governor's intent That said, as you read the proclamation, it leaves the door open for status quo under a regulatory framework. Well, as I spoke to just a few minutes ago, it's a very complicated chemistry. You almost have to get into the chemistry of the makeup of these products. And at a 10,000 foot view, you would think that, well, we can just regulate. Well, the problem with that is one, not enough money for enforcement action, not enough money to test and be watched oversights. And as a dosing goes, here's the thing: the teacup program, the compassionate use program that we have expanded tremendously this last session to accommodate those that need medical cannabis, is regulated and prescriptive and monitored. You cannot monitor use or dispensary at retail outlets, 8,000 and counting across this state. So as a practical matter goes, you can't really regulate it. But here's the underlying principle that people overlook. Marijuana is illegal across this country, and every state that has not made it, quote, legal, contrary to the federal law. And so we don't have to get very far into the weeds to say this is marijuana. Texas is illegal in Texas. And we can go back to that standard and that anchor to look to. The industry has perpetuated the idea that it's not illegal because it's, quote, synthesized from the cannabis plant. I will argue, and I think rational intent and common sense would say, regardless of the source, once it becomes THC above 0.3, it's illegal federally. But the federal law has dictated to every state in the union that you can regulate it however far you want. So if state of Texas is 0%, then we get the right to say that that's illegal product. So we're in a good spot. But I do not agree. And it's not that I'm contrary to what was said. I just think in its really rough review, you could argue that it leaves status quo. So the only thing that the veto's done is opened up another conversation that hopefully we have settled and reinvigorated both sides of this conversation, and it's deferred implementation. Unless we get the right kind of votes in the special, it could go in effect immediately, possibly, I guess. That was the other key thing about Arkansas's ruling. It goes into effect immediately. So Texas' legal position stands on really solid ground with a very recent, less than 30-day ruling from a circuit court that says states have the right to legislate over hemp how they choose to. And I'm kind of over the hemp and marijuana conversation because the distinguishment is very legal. At 0.3 or above, it goes to marijuana. At 0.3 or over, it's, quote, hemp. In the industry, if you survey their products, if you pull products, probably 99% of them are going to be over the 0.3%. So they're illegal federally and they're illegal statewide, regardless of the origin or how they got there. And that's what's been lost. And as much as I've tried and colleagues of mine have tried to educate, we still don't seem to get any traction on the real narrative is this is illegal before the 2019 hemp bill.
Governor Abbott's veto of SB3, the ban on THC products. What did you make of that, and was this a surprise?
Well, I didn't know what the governor was going to do, but I do know that I was the only elected Republican, I think, in all of Texas government who consistently opposed SB3. I believe I was the only elected Republican in the legislature to call on the governor to veto SB3, and I did that 3 weeks ago. So I don't think, I certainly had no heads up what he was going to do or not do, but it was unfortunate that the legislature passed a bill that, in my opinion, was massively government overreach. It was marching us in the direction of California-style nanny-statism, and it was going to force adults to make a very horrible choice. And these are patriotic, freedom-loving Texans who either want or relied on many of these products into either the very dangerous, deadly black market or to much more highly addictive pharmaceuticals. So it was a bill that needed to be vetoed.
Let me ask you something, because you voted against it.
Yep.
Representative Briscoe Cain of Houston also voted against it in its final form, the final vote. Yeah. And so you were the only two Republicans, as you said, who voted against it. And I'm wondering, I mean, why did all the other Republicans go for it, do you think? And why were you so, because this, according to what they say, the supporters of this, is a dangerous products and that it can hurt Texans.
But we have lots of ways of dealing with lots of dangerous products right now. I mean, we deal with alcohol and we deal with tobacco, which kill far more people than these hemp products. And these are products, quite frankly, people need to not lose sight of this. We're talking about products that became legal as a result of an action that President Trump took in 2018. I remember this very well. I was a senior member of President Trump's administration when he signed the bill that led to this. So we're talking about legalizing products that came about as a result of an action that President Trump took in 2018. And for somebody like myself who understands that the role of government, its number one job is to protect people's freedoms and their individual liberties, I can recognize a bill that goes way too far towards big government, liberalism, progressive style governments, and I will never let, to the extent that I have anything to do with it, I will never let the state of Texas become a nanny state, and that's why I was proud to oppose it.
Now let me ask you something, because the governor in his veto said that this was going to be tied up in the courts. And he cited a lot of legal reasons for this. And he said, you know, children don't need to have access to this. He wants there to be heavy regulation. Do you agree with that?
Well, let me make this point. I agree with the goal, the purported goal of SB3, which is to protect children from potentially dangerous products. Of course, that's a goal that I share, and I share it strongly. But I think that we are dealing with something here, which was SB3, which is total ban, complete government overreach. It goes too far in the goal that I share of protecting children, and it exceeded the appropriate and proper role of government. I think if we want to treat this stuff maybe perhaps more similarly to the way we deal with alcohol and tobacco with certain age restrictions, that's something that I would be welcome a discussion about, but SB3 just went too far.
And the governor...
And one more point though, because you did mention the legal questions. I mean, I want to be clear about this. I believe in separation of powers as much as just about anybody in any elected office in the state of Texas. And I would remind people, it is the legislature that writes laws in the state of Texas. And I think we should focus on, as a legislative body, passing laws that we believe in and that serve 30 million men and women in the state of Texas, and do so boldly, and then let what happens in the courts. But we should pass the laws that we believe in.
What do you think is going to happen in this special session? Do you see a scenario in which the legislature, Republicans and Democrats, will agree to, I mean, the governor listed a whole bunch of suggestions as far as potential regulations. Do you see that happening?
I have no idea what's going to happen in the special session, because I think the latest I heard from the lieutenant governor is that he plans to just put SB3 back on the floor and pass that again. So I do not know what type, if any, agreement will be reached. But I think the biggest point on the whole question of vetoes and special sessions, I mean, I kind of hate that, you know, while I called for SB3 to be vetoed, I believe it was the right thing to veto. The biggest news really shouldn't be the veto of SB3. The biggest news really should have been all of the other big government budget-busting liberal progressive bills that were not vetoed, primarily our budget, the most bloated liberal budget in the history of the state of Texas, and also other things we should have gotten done in the regular session, like property taxes.
I was going to ask you about that. I did want to finish up on SB3. You said something before that, you know, President Trump passed this bill in 2018.
Yeah.
Now this was to allow farmers to sell hemp, right, on a commercial basis. And I don't think they're impacted. I don't believe they're impacted by SB3.
There is some debate about that, but I know people on both sides hold different views on it. But I do think there are people arguing that it still might have a very adverse impact on our farmers.
But the question was, at least listening to the lieutenant governor, was some of these products were far stronger than were advertised. And he also said that in the veto, Governor Abbott is basically supporting the legal use of recreational marijuana. What do you say to that? Do you agree with that?
I'm not going to get between the governor and the lieutenant governor on that fight. But what I'll say to the point, though, is that if it's true, some of these arguments that what's being sold in stores is adulterated, it's falsely labeled, it contains illegal products, well, then those are already illegal right now, and the laws on our books should be enforced, and I have no problem with that whatsoever. But a blanket ban is just going too far.
One other question.
Yeah.
Do you support legalizing recreational marijuana?
I don't think anybody in the state of Texas is talking about that right now, and quite frankly, it's a discussion that's moot until the federal government changes its position, because right now, recreational marijuana is illegal at the federal level. So recreational marijuana is going to be illegal it's illegal in Texas today, and it's going to remain illegal regardless of what happens with SB3 in the special session.